This is a simple walkthrough through the Predictive Model Editor version 1.4. It will be referred to in this video as the PME. We start by looking at the main user interface, which resembles an Outlook-style interaction. We have a navigation pane here on the left, which allows us to look through some of the higher-level concepts that are represented by the application itself. And then on the right, we have the main working window. The main concepts of the PME are datasets, discretizers, data dictionaries, predictive models, and model evaluations. When you first start up the PME, you're presented with a quick start guide to help you get started. The first thing you'll notice is that the file management is primarily done through Windows Explorer. Upon launching the PME the first time, a directory is created in the default location, which is /predictive modeler, but it can be configured for different locations. For example, I have mine located under /PDT predictive modeler. By clicking on each of the folders that appear on the main concepts, you're taken directly to each individual folder. Once the files are loaded, you can click the refresh button to make them appear within the PME. And I happen to have a data dictionary, and it appears already. I also have the discretizer. We'll start the walkthrough with creating a data set, as this is the basis for the PME. Without a data set, we can't build predictive models. The first thing we need to know before creating a data set is what kind of data we'll be looking at. So we'll pick the source CSV file that we use. We'll do that by going to /PDT predictive modeler dataset CSV. So we'll select this. This data is related to the oil sands, and I know that it contains items like magnesium, potassium, bitumen, and others. So let's go to File, New, Dataset. We'll select that source CSV file. And I know that we happen to have a data dictionary because we already saw that. And I'm going to go ahead and select that one because that will be the best match for our data set. We're going to click OK. The data dictionary, just to go back, the data dictionary is stored as an XML file, and you can read these XML files within the PME so that you can, instead of guessing, you can actually see what the different items are. We have D50, fines, solids, water. We also have aliases as well. But as you can see, these closely match to the data set that we are using. After clicking OK, you're now taken to the new tab which contains the dataset tools and the unsaved dataset. The first tool within the dataset that you'll encounter is the missing invalid options. This is where we can process the dataset to make sure the program knows how to handle any missing or invalid data. For example, a column with missing data will be treated as a string data type unless we define that this blank space is missing and can be replaced with something like -1, in which case we could then treat that column as numeric. In this case, we have a few columns that contain missing data, and so we'll go ahead and process this data and save it. And as you'll notice, after clicking on the process missing and invalid data, we have these -1s appear in the blank areas. And then we'll go ahead and save. When saving, it will take you to the Predictive Modeler Datasets location. We're going to save this as a walkthrough. The next tool we'll look at is filtering. Here you can filter out columns and data as you see fit. Generally, this is done by more experienced users within the PME. The next tool in the Dataset tool is Split Dataset. This is where you can split the data set into two parts: a training data set, which can be used to build a model, and a testing data set, which can be used to evaluate the predictive models created in the training data set. So let's split the data set into, just in case we want to test our training model later. In this case, we can just keep everything as default and split the data. That will tell me where we're going to go into the dataset CSV, because it will actually create CSV files. Now what you'll note is that here the cardinality is 347, and there's only one observations for 1.5. In this case, we can't use class-dependent split type. So what we'll actually go ahead and do, we'll click random, which means that it will take a random 10% and split it into two. And now it's been split. As you can see, we now have two data sets on there. And this one will be used as our testing, and this one will be using as our training. So we'll go ahead and save these. We'll call this one train, and we're going to call this one test. And then we'll go back to our walkthrough PDS, which is a pattern discovery data set. The very last tool that you'll see within the dataset tools is the correlation. Here you can verify what attributes are correlated by clicking on Compute Correlations. What you're looking at is that there's a 0.985 correlation between attribute CA and CAEQ. And you can actually see, and here's one for 0.87 for CA and magnesium. And basically you can take a look and see what sort of columns are associated with one another. This will be helpful later on when we're actually evaluating the predictive models. The next concept in the PME is the discretization. We use the discretizers to categorize data into bins. Just like the data dictionary, it too is stored as an XML file. In this release of the PME, we've added the ability to create discretizers based on the data set from scratch. This is generally used by more experienced users. Let's create a discretizer. We'll start by clicking on New Catalog, and we're going to create one from the data set. So we'll select the data set, and we're going to call it Walkthrough. Now we've just created a discretizer. After creating the discretizer, we can now see that the discretizer tools have become available to us. The first tab is the overall view of what is contained in the discretizer. And in this case, we have adjusted recovery, bitumen in PF, bitumen in TF, CA, CAEQ, etc., etc. The next tab is the properties. And currently, the only property that there is the property name, and we called it Walkthrough. The next tab allows us to evaluate the discretizer. This allows us to make sure that the discretizer we're using is appropriate for the data set. We know in this case that it should be a good evaluation because we created the discretizer based off the data set. We'll take a look at the evaluation anyways, because there are instances where you have a data set and decide to use a pre-existing discretizer in the predictive models. We have a pre-existing discretizer here, and we can actually take a look at that and evaluate the discretizer against our walkthrough. And as you saw, to evaluate the discretizer, all we need to do is select the data set we want to evaluate it against. After selecting our data set, the discretized values will appear, and if we click on the Discretizer Performance tab, we'll be able to look at histograms of how the discretized performed. And as you can see, we have an error, no discretizer defined for sample ID. So that would be a poor discretizer to use for this case. So we're not going to use the curl discretizer. We're actually going to use the unsaved discretizer catalog. And we're going to go ahead and save that because we're pretty happy with it. Finally, the last tool available to us for the discretizers is the discretizer details. Here you can do a more advanced evaluation of the specific attributes within the discretizer. We can look deeper by selecting one of the discretizer attributes and then selecting the dataset associated with the discretizer and then click Evaluate. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to select bitumen. We're going to select the walkthrough PDS. And then we'll click Evaluate. And there are our numbers. We can view a histogram. That looks pretty good. The evaluation results and evaluation options appear only after clicking Evaluate. And by looking at the evaluation options, you'll see that there's two sub-tabs, numeric and string. String will be used if you have string data, which is new to the PME 1.4, where you can actually group strings into sets. But here you can round the bins. You can sort the midpoint discretizer, which would change the look of the bitumen or the histograms. Modifying the bins and modifying these options are usually done by more experienced users. The more you use it, the more that you'll understand how to use it and how to narrow down what you're looking at, get the information that you really need. The next we have the predictive models. Currently, this component is empty, so we need to create a new predictive model. We're going to create a predictive model based on the training data set that we created from the walkthrough pattern discovery data set. So we're going to go to File, New, Predictive Model Study. Right now it's asking for our data prep, and our data prep will be used the walkthrough XML. The data set that we'll be using, as earlier mentioned, is the training data set. As you can see on the right hand side, our data set and data prep mapping, all of them except for the sample ID have been mapped. So we'll go ahead and uncheck the sample ID. We're using the training set so that after we've built the model, we can try it out on the testing data set to validate our predictions. After selecting the files, we make sure that the mappings are all accounted for, and we can also change the dependent variable and confidence level down at the bottom. We're going to keep these the same. Once satisfied with the settings, we can build the model. You can also save the study for future evaluations. After clicking Build, an unsaved rule model appears on the screen. It contains all the rules that have been created using the discretizers and the data set, and you can see the performance by looking at the histograms at the bottom of the screen. You can export this to a CSV showing supporting data, and finally, you can run a prediction using the rule model by selecting the data set and choosing the classifier. So we'll go back to the rule model and we'll take a look at it. We'll take a look at all of these items here. So everything looks to be pretty good. We'll save that. So now we have our prediction models. After saving the prediction rule model, we can look at and evaluate the rule model evaluations and the rule model's effectiveness and accuracy. There's an option of an interactive model study or a batch model study. Under File, New, Model Evaluation Study, you'll find these two options. The interactive rule model evaluation allows the individual to evaluate individual or groups of columns of data. You do that by selecting the rule model and manually selecting values and clicking Evaluate. So right now the primary recovery is missing, so that's no good. This is used to evaluate specific rules. We're going to take a look at the batch model evaluation study. We'll select the prediction model and we're going to select the evaluation data. And we're going to, instead of selecting the training, which is what we created the rule model against, we're going to use the test data. And as you can see, everything matches up, and we'll click on Evaluate. The batch model study allows you to evaluate the entire data set against the rule model using the testing data set that we split earlier. And this is what it looks like. We can go through and evaluate the rules. This is an incorrect rule. The first one was correct. And then you can go and look at the reasonings why some of these are incorrect or the correctness of the rules, and evaluate the effectiveness of the predictive rule model. That concludes the walkthrough of the PME 1.4. Thanks for watching.